After sweeping Vice President Kamala Harris aside in the 2024 election,
President-elect Trump began outlining a foreign policy vision that felt strangely familiar, almost like a sudden revival of the power politics practiced by the United States at the dawn of the 20th century. His approach echoed the spirit of Theodore Roosevelt's big stick diplomacy, where influence was measured not just through alliances, but through a willingness to project hard power when convenient. Trump quickly unveiled a striking list of geopolitical ambitions touching Canada, Mexico, Panama, and even Greenland, a catalog of targets that suggested a dramatic reshaping of America's strategic map. His most relentless commentary came at Canada's expense. Trump began referring to the country as the 51st state, while hinting at crushing tariffs if Ottawa resisted his agenda. The pressure mounted so intensely that many believe it contributed to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's unexpected decision to step down. "I intend to resign as party leader and Prime Minister once our party selects a new leader through a national leadership process." Though Trudeau never directly tied his announcement to Trump, the timing and the escalating strain made the connection hard to ignore. Trump then turned his attention south, announcing that the United States would begin calling the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. Most observers saw this as retaliation against Mexico's president, Claudia Sheinbaum, who refused to support Trump's harder migration proposals. Tensions between the two nations edged upward as both leaders stood firm. His rhetoric toward Panama reignited a century-old historical wound. Trump denounced former President Jimmy Carter for handing the canal back to Panama under the Torrijos-Carter treaties. He reminded the public that the United States had carved Panama out of Colombia specifically to build the canal, and that construction between 1903 and 1914 came at the cost of more than 25,000 American lives. Pointing to new Chinese investments around the canal, Trump hinted at the possibility of using force to correct what he described as one of America's worst strategic blunders. Giving the Panama Canal to Panama was a massive mistake. Yet none of these remarks provoked as much alarm as his comments about Greenland, an autonomous territory of Denmark, protected under NATO and long considered a stable corner of the alliance. Sky News broke down the deeper strategic logic behind Trump's interest. A single look at the map reveals Greenland's importance. It sits like an enormous Arctic shield, touching the interests of the United States, Canada, Russia, and the Scandinavian world. As global warming opens the legendary Northwest Passage, a sea route frozen shut throughout human history, the Arctic transforms from an inaccessible wasteland into one of the most strategically valuable regions on Earth. Greenland also holds immense reserves of rare minerals, critical for advanced technology and renewable energy. In a future defined by resource competition, Greenland suddenly becomes a treasure chest. No outsider truly knows the extent of Trump's ambitions for the island, but his increasingly forceful tone suggested he intended to push the issue far more aggressively than any modern U.S. president. A military confrontation, however, remains almost impossible. Any armed action against a NATO-protected region would shatter an alliance that has anchored American security for over 75 years. Trump didn't formally rule out force, but the geopolitical cost makes it nearly unthinkable. The far more plausible scenario is diplomatic, a new compact between the United States and Greenland resembling the agreements the U.S. has with Micronesia, Palau, and the Marshall Islands. Such a treaty would expand America's military presence, deepen economic cooperation, and give Washington access to critical Arctic resources, all while funneling large investments into Greenland. Recent meetings between Greenland and Denmark made one thing very clear. Greenland's Prime Minister, Mute Borup Ageda,
firmly rejected any suggestion of American annexation. While social media circulated misleading clips implying otherwise, Igede publicly reaffirmed Greenland's long-term goal: independence, not absorption into another state. Denmark's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, responded with diplomacy, polite, measured, and designed to keep every option open without conceding an inch. Despite dramatic media narratives, the scenario most people overlook is the one most likely to occur. A three-party treaty between Denmark, Greenland, and the United States that grants Washington expanded military rights and greater access to Greenlandic minerals. Such an agreement could strengthen America's foothold in the Arctic, while giving Greenland leverage to pursue eventual autonomy. If the Greenlandic government ever moves toward a referendum on independence, U.S. influence would surge. America would almost certainly offer deep economic support and a security partnership to stabilize the newborn state. But reaching that referendum requires negotiation, and Trump would need to convince Denmark to participate willingly. To win Danish cooperation, Trump would have two strategies: conciliation or coercion. If he chose a cooperative approach, he could offer major American infrastructure investments inside Denmark, special trade corridors that allow Denmark to bypass broad U.S. tariffs applied to the EU, a share of tax revenue from Greenland's natural resources, reduced Danish financial contributions to NATO, cultural and linguistic protections for Danes living or working in Greenland. If diplomacy failed, the pressure could escalate. Denmark sends 12.7% of its exports to the United States, making America its second-largest customer after Germany. Trade restrictions on pharmaceuticals, agricultural goods, machinery, or livestock could inflict significant damage on Denmark's economy. But such a move would risk triggering a full-scale confrontation with the European Union and unraveling decades of transatlantic partnership. For that reason, an aggressive economic strategy is improbable. The realistic path, if talks unfold peacefully, leads to Greenland gaining more autonomy and possibly holding a referendum on its future. So far, no credible polling suggests that most Greenlanders want to join the United States, and even independence does not yet command a majority. But geopolitics is shaped by momentum as much as public opinion. When great powers start rearranging the world around you, positions can shift faster than expected. Let's imagine the world in which Greenland, after generations of debate and centuries under Danish rule, delivers a historic pro-American vote. That single decision would trigger an avalanche of consequences almost immediately. From Greenland's point of view, the largest barrier to joining the United States has always been clear: survival without Denmark's financial umbilical cord. Today, Denmark provides around $511 million every year to sustain Greenland's society, money that keeps hospitals staffed, ensures free healthcare, funds education, covers parental leave, and underwrites the social infrastructure the island depends on. In economic terms, that subsidy makes up 20% of Greenland's total GDP and more than half of its public budget. It is not a luxury. It is the foundation upon which modern Greenland stands. So the first question becomes, how could Greenland ever afford independence or annexation? And the surprising answer is that the United States, if politically motivated, could easily assume that responsibility. Contrary to popular belief, American states are free to adopt expansive welfare programs, even single-payer healthcare, if they choose. Nothing in U.S. law prevents Greenland from preserving the generous Scandinavian-style system it enjoys today, funded directly by Washington rather than Copenhagen. In exchange, Greenland would enter a vastly larger economic ecosystem. Access to the American domestic market, deregulation of its fishing sector, and a wave of federal and private investment into roads, ports, energy, mining, and tourism could shift local sentiment dramatically. Under those conditions, joining the United States might feel less like losing sovereignty and more like choosing stability, prosperity, and global relevance. The BBC has reported that among Greenlanders, the long-term expectation is that independence is inevitable, and that Denmark, unlike many former colonial powers, would accept such a vote without obstruction. But independence has a price. Denmark would demand compensation to offset the sudden loss of fiscal responsibility, historic ties, and future resource income. Estimates range wildly, from a few billion to an extraordinary $1.1 trillion, depending on what exactly is being transferred. A 2019 Washington Post analysis estimated Greenland's monetary value at $52.7 billion, a figure many analysts still reference. Legally, acquiring Greenland would require 2/3 of the U.S. Senate. Republicans would need at least 14 Democratic senators to support the deal. Although difficult, it's not unthinkable. A number of moderate Democrats have historically been open to deals involving national security, Arctic presence, or resource independence, especially if paired with unrelated political concessions. And in the background, an army of lobbyists from technology sectors, mineral extraction firms, and private equity giants would exert enormous pressure. Greenland holds vast deposits of rare earth elements, uranium, zinc, nickel, and other strategic minerals at a time when global competition over such resources is intensifying. Corporate interests alone could sway the political landscape. Once the Senate approved the treaty, the annexation would be ratified. Overnight, the United States would surpass China and Canada to become the second largest country on Earth, a staggering geopolitical shift. Global reaction, a world holding its breath. Following the vote, Trump and Greenland's Prime Minister Agede would likely appear together for a dramatic international press conference. Their joint message would emphasize stability. This was not conquest, not coercion, but a democratic choice. NATO, they would insist, remains secure, unbroken, and stronger for having navigated a peaceful territorial transition. By this time, the political map of North America would likely have shifted. Pierre Poilievre, leading a conservative Canadian government, would almost certainly recognize the new arrangement quickly, seeking to maintain close cooperation with Washington. With Canada already surrounded by the United States on 3 sides, including the Arctic, the symbolism of America expanding further north would be striking, but not threatening. Canada's security and economy are deeply intertwined with the US, and that would not change. Across the Nordic world, the reaction would be pragmatic. Denmark's GDP would explode, rising by more than 130% in the year of the transaction, bringing massive fiscal relief from no longer subsidizing Greenland. With Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and Finland all maintaining strong ties to Washington, the idea of a Nordic backlash becomes more dramatic than realistic. The broader European Union might express mild criticism, but trade negotiations, not Greenland, would dominate their concerns. NATO's strategic unity would push major EU states toward acceptance. Still, fringe parties, France's La France Insoumise, Germany's AfD, and other anti-American or anti-NATO groups would undoubtedly weaponize the moment for political gain. Russia's reaction would depend entirely on the fate of the Ukraine war. If Trump froze the conflict, likely by locking in the current battle lines, Putin might applaud the Greenland acquisition as a step toward normalized US-Russian relations. If the war continued and the West kept supplying Ukraine, Moscow would denounce the annexation as blatant American imperialism. Either way, Russia faces a severe strategic problem. US missiles stationed in Greenland would sit uncomfortably close to St. Petersburg, Moscow, and the dense western core of Russia, where 3/4 of its population lives. A future American administration with a harsher stance toward Russia could use Greenland as a formidable pressure point. China's response would be immediate and hostile. Beijing has invested hundreds of millions in Greenlandic mineral projects, expecting decades of access. Those rights would almost certainly be lost, either nationalized by Washington or transferred to American corporations. In retaliation, China could formally annex Hong Kong or Macau, intensify its military posture around Taiwan, or escalate confrontation with the West to avoid appearing weak. For China, the symbolism is dangerous. If America can acquire a strategically placed territory with global resource importance, it raises fears about what Washington might attempt next. It's difficult to imagine a moment that reshapes America's global reputation more than this. A superpower, proving it can expand its influence not through coercion or military pressure, but through negotiation with allies who willingly choose partnership. If anything, the Greenland deal would strengthen Washington's standing as the so-called leader of the free world, demonstrating that diplomacy, not force, can still redraw borders in the 21st century. Far from fracturing NATO, the peaceful transition would likely tighten the alliance, showing that even sensitive territorial questions can be resolved inside the Western family. Yet despite its massive size, nearly 200,000 square miles larger than Alaska, Greenland would not become America's 51st state. With a population of just 56,000, it has fewer residents than hundreds of US counties, and only a fraction of the population of the smallest state, Wyoming, which has about 584,000 people, 10 times Greenland's total. For perspective, Puerto Rico, with 3.2 million people, still hasn't become a state. Greenland wouldn't even be close. Instead, Greenland would enter the Union as a federal territory, instantly the largest in American history. A territorial constitution would be drafted, replacing its parliamentary structure with an American-style republican system. Greenlandic and Danish would become co-official languages, much like Spanish in Puerto Rico. The island's existing political parties would dissolve and reconstitute themselves as territorial versions of the Republican and Democratic parties. Within the US political landscape, reactions would split. The moderate, pro-cooperation wing of the Democratic Party, the John Fetterman camp, so to speak, would applaud the peaceful nature of the arrangement. The progressive faction, led by figures like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, would condemn the acquisition as a form of modern neocolonialism, arguing Greenland's small population left it vulnerable. The truth is, no one would know exactly how many Americans support the purchase, but once the headlines faded, the public would move on. For most citizens, it wouldn't change daily life. For Trump, however, the ease of the annexation might embolden him toward a far more aggressive foreign policy posture elsewhere. In Greenland, the US government would move quickly. Massive federal investments would modernize the island's infrastructure, ports, airfields, highways, energy networks, to support expanded mining operations and new military bases. Some of these bases could house nuclear storage facilities and advanced missile defense arrays designed to monitor and deter Russian activity in the Arctic. The island could also become the prototype for Trump's so-called freedom cities, a concept he promoted heavily during his campaign. Nearly 1/3 of US land is federally owned, and Trump often spoke of using a tiny fraction of it, 1/2 of 1%, to establish entirely new urban hubs. Greenland, with its enormous, untouched landscapes and strategic position, could be a flagship location for such experiments. These planned cities would aim to revive an American frontier spirit, offering new homes, new industries, and affordable living for families priced out of major metropolitan areas. In the long term, many economists believe Greenland could rival the importance of the Panama Canal or even the Suez Canal. As Arctic ice continues to melt, the North Pole may open into one of the world's most valuable shipping corridors. With U.S. naval forces dominating the region, America would control the key artery between the Atlantic and Pacific, a blow to Russia's Arctic ambitions and a challenge to the strategic goals of BRICS nations. This Arctic dominance would also help preserve the U.S. dollar's position as the world's reserve currency by reinforcing American control over global trade routes. Regardless of present political disagreements, Trump would be remembered forever as the president who bought Greenland. Whether that legacy becomes a triumph or a humiliation would depend entirely on the island's future commercial success. And the potential is enormous. Greenland is believed to contain up to 31.4 billion barrels of oil, which would place it among the top 12 national reserves on Earth. Beneath the ice lie immense quantities of rare earth elements, uranium, and minerals essential to the modern technological world. As climate change melts the ice sheet, those resources, locked away for millennia, would become accessible. If U.S. investment and private industry succeeded in unlocking those reserves, Greenland might one day be viewed the same way Americans now talk about Alaska. A spectacular bargain that reshaped U.S. economic and strategic power. And in doing so, it could set a precedent unlike anything seen in generations, a world where great powers once again purchase territory from smaller states, not through conflict, but through the cold, calculated logic of geopolitical opportunity.